Hey, welcome back to the Wide Right Podcast. I'm Manny Navarro from The Athletic, joined today by Carlos Ledo of the MIA All-Day Pod. Also, I'm trying to look at your title, bro. Walter Mercado of Hialeah.
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'm
Why
I,
why why the
I'm a
Walter Mercado of
diviner. I'm a
Hialeah?
diviner. I'm a psychic. I told you guys. 27-21 and ended up 28-22. And I don't want to hear all these excuses on Twitter like, oh, but the fourth quarter is the only reason why. No, the game is 4 quarters, my friend. The game is 4 quarters, all right? We'll discuss all that now in a minute. We'll talk about that fourth quarter coming in. But everything I said that was going to happen in this game ended up happening. Florida State came out with the trick plays. They came out with what I said they were going to do on offense. On defense, I said the Hurricanes needed to get more involvement. We've been saying for weeks they need to get more big plays and explosives, and that was pretty much the difference in the game. I said turnovers would always also dictate the game. And that's what killed Florida State against Virginia. It happened again. But hey, listen, you guys listen to what you want to listen to. You hear what you want to hear when you hear us talk, and you make up your own minds and throw on your own crazy comments on YouTube. And we're just going to keep doing what we do. One day, eventually, you will learn. You gonna learn that we are the most accurate podcast out there.
Wow. Coming out strong, just like the Canes did in Tallahassee, getting that 28-3 lead before they decided to stop playing essentially on offense and let Florida State get back in it. Some scary moments there, obviously, with the onside kick that ricocheted. And luckily for Miami, landed in one of their own players' hands. But let's start with that, Carlos. Let's start with the way the game ended before we talk about the way the game started, which was an absolute ass kicking by the Hurricanes.
Yeah.
I thought that if Miami played their game, that they could beat Florida State by potentially 2 to 3 scores. That was what I said in this podcast. And people are gonna say, "No, you didn't. You said it's gonna be close." Yes, I said I think it'll end up being close because Miami is going to not play that way, or they're going to let their foot off the gas, like we've seen them do in a couple games this year, right? Against Notre Dame, they did that.
Yep.
Against Florida,
Florida.
they kind of went conservative. That was a big conversation last podcast. Go back and listen to everything that we said there. But ultimately, the fourth quarter was scary. But I don't sit here and take away anything from it and say, well, Florida State could really hang with Miami. On the contrary, I look at it as Mario's got a little case of PTSD because of what happened with Georgia Tech a couple of years ago,
And
and he's
Syracuse.
and and he's letting it affect the way the team finished games because he's reining the offense back in. And look, in the end, was Florida State good enough to beat Miami? Hell no, they weren't. I think they proved that through three and a half quarters. But the quarter still, and it's proof that when this team's not playing, but they're playing aggressively, a can, but they're not playing at the best.
Right. And this is what we were talking about last week when we had that discussion at the end of the pod. Kill a mosquito with an axe, right? This is why you kill a mosquito with an axe. When you have a team down, you stomp on their neck and you make sure they don't get back up because any little breath of life that you breathe into them gives them an opportunity to come back and beat you. We talked about it last week when we talked about the Florida game. They had dominated that game completely. Then all of a sudden, Florida comes down and scores one touchdown and they're back in the game. Just like Notre Dame, they dominated that game for the most part. Then one late score by Notre Dame ties it, and now we're scrambling to win the game at the end. It does the team a disservice when they've busted their ass so much and taken control of a game for so long to either have a lapse in the third or fourth quarter or take their foot off the gas and intentionally not be aggressive to allow the other team to come back in the game. Now, luckily, the defense this year is a lot better, and it held for the most part and stopped the opponents from coming back. But Florida State counterpunched really well in the fourth quarter and got the couple scores they needed to get back in this game, including a 2-point conversion. If not for a little bit of a ricochet there at the end, they might have picked up that onside kick, and who knows what happens.
Yeah, it really was scary at the end. I was gonna throw up some of the graphics here from the end of that game so that our viewers can check this out. But this is the final stats for the fourth quarter. When you look at it, Miami had 17 total yards of offense in the fourth quarter. Florida State had 188. Ran a bunch of more plays, obviously, than Miami did, 35-15. But in the end, the defense certainly, we knew the defense was good enough to win that game. They proved it for 3.5 quarters. But when you're basically just going 3 on out on offense and you're getting penalties and not doing what you're supposed to do,
Yep.
you can let a team in. And so that's the scary part. That's what has me worried, and why before the season I said, as good as I think this Miami team is, and they could potentially be better without Cam Ward, which is proven true, you still have that fear in the back of your mind that they're going to let one go because they don't show up to play. And listen, even the greatest Miami teams did that, right? Go back to 2001 and that Boston College game, right? When they went on the road and sort of laid an egg and had to pull it out by the hairs on their chinny chin chin. So look, they don't have to go undefeated to make the college football playoff, but you do have to probably go undefeated to make the ACC championship game.
Yes, that's
And
the point I
that's
was
the
going to get
thing
to.
that's
Yeah.
tricky. That's the tricky part here, Carlos, as we get back into our discussion here. What do you? I mean, when you look at those numbers in the fourth quarter, what sort of stuck out the most? Was it the lack of aggressiveness on offense? Was it the penalties? Mario said the penalties is really what derailed them. Do you agree with that?
I think it's a little bit, it's a combination of both, because, and I think they both point to the same thing. I think it's a mentality of letting go and taking your foot off the gas, like we talked about, taking your foot off the neck of the opponent and breathing and relaxing. And you can't do that. Not anymore. Not in conference play, especially not against the opponents you're running up against, and not going into the playoffs in the conference championship if you're lucky enough to get there. The thing is, you had, like we saw, 6 penalties for 64 yards in the fourth quarter. That is a mental breakdown. You saw Florida State coming back and driving down the field and guys half-assing it in terms of trying to make tackles. There were a lot of missed tackles in that fourth quarter on defense. There were things that weren't happening through the first 3 quarters of the game that ended up happening in the fourth quarter that seemed like the team just mentally shut down and they were already back in Miami partying and celebrating the win. And that can't happen. And offensively, it's inexcusable when you've dominated a team for 3 quarters to have 17 yards of total offense in a quarter. That's not being more conservative. That's just being lazy in terms of your play calling. It almost seems like they were satisfied not turning the ball over so much. They were willing to take punts and willing to take losses or no gains on most of the plays they called, which to me is unacceptable. There are ways to be aggressive and protect the football and not totally give up on offense and just be satisfied punting the ball away.
Right. And people criticize Mario. They were up 9 points, obviously. They were in field goal range after they recovered the onside kick. Could have kicked the field goal to make it a 12-point game, which obviously, Florida State played it smart, right? When they got the ball back on their next to last possession, or actually on their last possession, because Miami recovered the last
Mm-hmm.
onside, they kicked the field goal and gave themselves a chance with the onside to potentially, throw a Hail Mary up and beat them. Did you agree with Mario's decision to go for it on fourth and short there, or would you have liked to see him kick the field goal?
Listen, that late in the game when Florida State's trying to come back, you want to make it as difficult as possible for them to come back, right? So if they get the ball back and they kick that field goal like they did, they're down a score, and they could actually get 7 and win the game. If you make it 12, it's pretty much over. And I think at that point, based on where the ball was, it was not a deep field goal. It would have been enough for them to put the game away. I think Mario's thinking was probably, listen, I don't know what's going to happen on a field goal. It could be a bad snap. We could shank a kick. They could block it. Who knows? I know that I need about a yard, half a yard, whatever the case may be. We got another one on fourth down. We've got a good offensive line. We've got backs that can pound it. We can get it done. So to me, I'm not going to criticize him for the decision. I probably would have kicked the field goal just to get up 12 and pretty much shut the door in the game. But I see where
Well,
his
you
thinking
forced him to
was.
score 2 touchdowns. You
Right,
basically
right.
forced him to get the end zone
You end
twice.
the game
Right.
basically for the most part. Um, but I see where his thinking is. I'm not going to criticize him for that. That was an aggressive play call. I can't be two-faced and tell him that I want him to be more aggressive in the fourth quarter and late in games, and not say that was, I'm okay with it. I can live with that. I can live with that aggression because of the way the game has been going. I'd prefer to kick the field goal and make it pretty much a done deal, but I see where his thinking was.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the full team stats for the game, and obviously Malachi Tony had a huge performance for Miami, the freshman receiver. We had talked about a lack of explosiveness in this offense. Well, they look a little bit more explosive when teams decide, like Florida State did, to just try to take away the run, right? Florida
Yep.
State basically loaded up the box and said, well, we're going to put our DBs on an island with Malachi Tony and hope to corral him and CJ Daniels and hope that they don't beat us. And in the end, that's what backfired for Florida State. Carson Beck proved that he was one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Amazing touch on that flea flicker to Malachi Tony. Obviously, threw a couple of quick slants and screens to set up the other touchdowns to Tony. And of course, Tony had one touchdown wiped out by an illegal motion penalty. So it could have been 5 touchdown passes for Carson Beck. And so it could have been a bigger, easier night for Miami. And I don't want to take away from that, right? I mean, in the end, yes, Florida State had more yards. But I think where Miami ultimately won the game, Carlos, was on first down defense. right? The Seminoles moved the ball quickly down the field on first down on that opening drive, got in the field goal range. But after that, Miami did a great job, I thought, on first down defense, which was the key to the game, which you and I talked about, which is not falling for Gus Malzahn's antics and
Right.
movement, and really Corey Heatherman deserves to be patted on the back for doing a tremendous job in that regard.
Yeah, he caught him on the first drive. He really had him on. Gus Malzahn had the Hurricanes defense on their heels the first drive, but give credit to Heatherman. He really settled down, got the defense to settle down, made corrections and adjustments as the game went on, and made sure that everybody was in their place. There was a couple miscues here and there, but nothing like that first drive, and they shut it down. To me, the other concerning thing is, I mean, we talked about it last week. We wanted, or I thought, if the Hurricanes held Florida State to under 150 yards rushing, that they would win the game. And, sure enough, they held them to 132. Not really happy about the way they ran the football, but that's because Florida State was just focusing on shutting that down and forcing Carson Beck to beat them. And like you saw, I mean, they Florida State outgained the Hurricanes, but to me, the biggest difference in the game was those explosives. You take those explosives away, and it's a totally different ball game. So thankfully, the Hurricane offense was able to get those big plays and start to come alive in a way they hadn't done all season.
And really, I think it's safe to say, Carlos, that that's the way most opponents are probably going to play Miami going forward. It's take away the run. That's the smart thing to do. Force Carson Beck and those receivers to beat you. And if you've got good defensive backs like Ohio State does, you can probably give Miami some huge headaches. But Florida State's defense was not good enough. They weren't up for the task. Just not good enough to be able to play Miami straight up like that and cover their receivers. And kudos to Mario Cristobal for building a roster that is good enough to beat all three of their in-state rivals, right? To this point, and now we'll see what happens in the second half of the season. They have another bye week this week. They get Louisville a week from Friday. Louisville to me is probably the second or top opponent left on their regular season schedule, even though they lost to Florida 4-1 and lost to Virginia at home in overtime. I think on paper, and we're going to take a look at that here in a little bit. I think that this is probably one of their next biggest tests in terms of opponents. That's not to say much. That's not to say Louisville is as good as Notre Dame or even as good as Florida or Florida State, but Jeff Brom is a good coach, and I'm sure he's going to have a good game plan going into this game. To me, what I ultimately took away from this game, Carlos, was this defense can be trusted. They can
Yeah.
be trusted not just to get to the quarterback and create pressure, but to stay in their lanes, to stay in their gaps, to stay on their assignments. Jacoby Thomas, I thought, did a phenomenal job at the safety position, just being in the right place at all times. Zach Poyser, I thought, played pretty well before he got nicked up in that game. Obviously Bryce Fitzgerald, the freshman safety, 3 interceptions now in just 112 snaps. I think he's going to make the freshman All-American team, the midseason team anyway. Potentially could be in for a bigger role here in the second half of the season, depending on what happens with Zechariah Poyser and his health. But this is a team that is really beginning, I think, to flourish. Miami is in different areas with young players. We already talked about Malachi Toney. We've talked about Markel Bell, how dominant he's been at left tackle. When you look at this team, the state of this team right now, what do you like the most?
I think you've got a defense, like you said, that could be trusted, that could shut the door on teams when needed. When you need them to get a stop, they get a stop. They turn the ball over. They're not like the defense a year ago that was not only getting rush out all over the place, but these guys turn the ball over. They get the opponents to turn the ball over, which we didn't do a year ago. The other thing offensively is you've got a steady quarterback, a guy that's even keeled. He's not, too high, too low. He's consistent. He's not going to put up gaudy numbers, but what he's going to do is going to put the ball in the right place, finds the open man, and doesn't make mistakes very often. So that is to me one of the most important things about this team. And of course, this offensive line, right? You trust this offensive line to keep the quarterback clean, to make holes when needed, to bulldoze the other team, and the defensive line as well. I think they have the best defensive end combination in the country. I don't think it's even close. Mesidor and Bain. I think Bain by himself had 11 pressures this last game. It's
Mm-hmm.
incredible what they do on the defensive line to disrupt quarterbacks, and they've faced athletic quarterbacks the last couple of weeks. When they face a quarterback that is a pocket passer, they're going to wreak havoc on them.
Yeah, and look, they climbed up to number 2 in the AP poll. I said a few weeks ago I thought that if Miami played an undefeated Florida State and beat an undefeated Florida State, that they would vault to number 1. Unfortunately, Florida State lost to Virginia, and
Yep.
that affected projection of Miami getting to number one. But ultimately, look, they're number two in the country. And everybody, I mean, Carlos, I've been on the internet watching all of these shows. Everybody is talking about them being perhaps the best team in the country right now. I would tend to think that I mean, if you asked me straight up, Manny, put $100 right now, who wins the national championship? Based on the way everybody has looked to this point, I would say Ohio State probably beats Miami in the national championship game because of how sick that defense is for Ohio State. The fact that they can shut down Miami's passing game and Miami's running game, they're good enough to do that. I'm not saying they would, but they're good enough to do that. I would probably pick the defending champions and Jeremiah Smith and some of those guys that they've got on offense, and Julian Sayin, who's done a good job at quarterback, to beat Miami right now. But I think this Miami team is certainly good enough right now to get to the national championship. The way that they're playing, the way Ruben Bain is playing on the defensive line, the way Carson Beck is playing the quarterback position, the way Malachi Toney is explosive in the passing game, the way that the defense can be trusted, the way the special teams can be trusted, right? They're not really having any special teams mishaps either. So
Yeah, remember we talked
this
about the kicker being a question mark at the start of the season. It's looked good so far.
this has been a complete team. But if we're gonna sit here and talk about something that's bothering us a little bit, for me,
Well,
it's
first of
the
all, let me go back
penalties.
to your point about Ohio State.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
First of all, you brought back a PTSD, and I don't need this. Okay, I've been trying to get over this game for 22 years now, and I can't do this. Okay, I can't do
Right.
this with you today. Now, if they do
Okay.
happen to play against Ohio State in the national championship game, for the love of God, I need a win there. I need a win for multiple reasons, man. Number one, this national championship dry sprout. This is this is probably worse than the 40-year-old virgin in terms of dry spells. Okay, this lack of national championship appearances and wins over the last 20 some odd years has been killing me. Number two, I need this to help my wife. My poor wife, one of our first dates was watching the Ohio State Miami national championship game at a friend's house. They have not won ever since. We've been together since that point, and she thinks she's a jinx. I'm not saying she is. Possibility. I don't know. But for her sanity and mine, we need a win there. Okay, we need to win a national championship win. We need to beat Ohio State to end the curse on my poor wife. All right. And
All
third, I
right.
just need revenge for that game. I just need revenge for that game. I can't take it anymore. Go ahead.
Well, look, right now they're 1-2. Oregon is number three. They have a huge game this week against Indiana. We'll find out if Indiana's for real, right? Indiana went 0-2 last year in their two games against top 10 opponents, even though I think Kurt Signetti might be the best coach in college football. To be able to do what he's doing at Indiana, to turn that program around without, so much of the resources maybe that everybody else has in terms of even just recruiting in your own backyard.
And without Gene
Uh,
Hackman helping him.
and without Gene Hackman, yeah, I mean it's it's been amazing what Indiana has done. But right now, I think it's pretty clear that the three best teams in college football are Ohio State, Oregon, and Miami, and
Yep.
whatever order you want to put them in, that's fine. I think Miami has the potential to be the number one team in the country, but gun to head right now on Wednesday, October 8th at 1 p.m. I'm telling you that Ohio State defense is for real, and when I play that game out in my mind, I think that defense, it's only given up 20 points this season, takes the field, that they could be really, really tough for Miami in terms of some of the one-on-one matchups at receiver, et cetera, and being able to shut down the run. But I'd love to see it. I'd love to see that game take place. We'll see if we end up getting there. We'll see how healthy both of those teams are when we get to the playoffs. But right now, on paper, I think it's going to be a Miami Ohio State national championship game, which would be great for a lot of reasons. But I think one thing Miami has to do, and Mario Cristobal absolutely agrees with me on this point, they got to clean up the penalties. They've
Yep.
really, I mean, right now, I've done all the research, Carlos, as you know. They rank 112th with 7.8 penalties per game among 136 FBS teams. They're averaging 60 penalty yards a game. That's 100th in the country. When you look at Ohio State, they're 16th in penalties per game and 15th in penalty yards per game. Oregon, 4th in penalties per game, 5th in penalty yards per game. And then Indiana is 11th and 8th in both of those categories. So when you start looking at other teams, Texas A&M, who's probably the best team in the SEC right now, they are next. They're just as bad as Miami with penalties, 9.2 per game, which is 133rd, and 74 penalty yards per game, which is also 133rd. So, um, you know, I'm not saying that penalties can doom Miami, will doom Miami or hurt them. But certainly it's something you have to take a look at. And in this game against Florida State, which we'll do right now, I'm going to throw the penalties up from this game so everybody can see who the guilty parties were. Let's start here on offense. You will see that a lot of this stuff has been motion type stuff throughout the whole season. Carlos, false starts, illegal motions, cost them a touchdown. Two false starts, one on Markel Bell, another on Inez Cooper. You had a holding um, on Elijah Lofton, and then a personal foul on a punt, I guess here. That was the big hit on the punt return for Florida State. That was Dylan Day. And then you're gonna look at defense. Some penalties here. 7 penalties for 72 yards. Few personal fouls. 3 personal fouls there on Miami. Look, it's something that they, I think, have to clean up, because when you do play a great team, right? Somebody who's really, really good, it's going to beat you. You're going to end up losing the game because of a dumb penalty. And certainly last year we saw how Jacoby George's penalty against Syracuse,
Yep.
right, late in that game, cost them. What's your feeling on it? What is your feeling on penalties? Do you think it's more about aggression? Do you think it's more about discipline? Right now with Miami's penalty issues, what would you say it is?
Well, I think it's mental mistakes because of the type of penalties, especially in that Florida State game, what you saw there. When you're talking about motion penalties, false starts, when you're talking about penalties that are mental, offsides, things of that nature, things that are just being keeping your head in the game. Those are penalties that aren't acceptable. Now, if they're aggressive penalties, you could take a pass interference, a face mask. You could take illegal hands to the face hold on offense if you're being aggressive with it, right? If you're trying to save your quarterback from a big hit, if you're doing something that's worth taking the penalty for, right? And if you're doing it in an aggressive manner, not in a dumb way, I think those things you could live with. But the mental mistakes are the problem, and I think that plays into the fourth quarter again. You having a mental lapse, letting go mentally, and committing all these penalties in the fourth quarter, allowing this team back in the game because your mind is now not locked in anymore. You've let go, and now this other team is still locked in, still fighting, and getting back in the game, and you're just sort of like nonchalantly allowing it to happen. So that to me is the thing that needs to happen, is they need to lock in mentally and secure games and make sure that if they are committing penalties, they're aggressive penalties, not mental mistakes.
Yeah, that's and to me, I agree with everything you said. I think the procedural penalties on offense is the one that for sure I know Mario's killing him as an offensive lineman, and I know that that's something that he's going to work on. Shannon Dawson's going to work on. Alex Mirabal, all of them are going to be stressing that here during the off week. Again, they've got another week to heal. Mario was asked about injuries and the state of the team. He kind of went about a roundabout answer when David Lake from Inside the U asked him that in Monday's press conference. So we don't know who's really banged up right now and who could potentially miss time. But I would watch for that Poiser injury in the secondary, whether or not that ultimately forces the freshman Bryce Fitzgerald to start playing more snaps. There's some other
Which
guys
I
who
think will be
obviously,
good.
no, Fitzgerald is really, really good. He's a tremendous ball hawk, but it's nice to have him sprinkled in versus maybe counted on all the time. We don't know. There's a reason he's not starting and playing the majority of the snaps. There's a reason he's being sprinkled in at the passing situation. So we don't know what that is. Obviously, it's whatever the coaches are seeing in practice. But anyway, those are things we'll have to see here as the season progresses. The injury status of some players at Miami going into that Louisville game. For right now, though, let's keep the discussion on the best teams in college football. And I wanted to throw this graphic up here comparing Miami to Ohio State and some of the other top teams in college football here statistically. And I know, look, there's a shitload of numbers I just threw up on the screen here. And I didn't include Ole Miss because I didn't do the research for them this week. I think they're off. So I basically looked up everybody who was playing in a big game this week for my weekly predictions. I threw some cool stats on there: time trailing, time leading, where teams rank scoring offense wise, who their biggest wins are over to this point. But I think, to me, when I look at some of these numbers, first of all, Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, all really good teams on defense, right? You look at it, they can play defense. They've been able to stop opposing defenses in terms of yards per play. I know, I get it. I know some of you are rolling your eyes and saying, well, who the hell are they playing in the Big Ten? The Big Ten doesn't have, great quarterbacks, etc. That's why this weekend's game between Oregon and Indiana, for me, is a much watch. Carlos, is the 3:30 kickoff in Eugene. We're going to get a chance to see Dante Moore and your boy, Fernando Mendoza,
Yeah.
uh, go head to head in a huge, huge matchup. I know a lot of people look at Oregon and they say, well, look what Penn State just did. They lost to UCLA on the road, a winless UCLA team. That means Oregon must not be as good. But I tend to disagree. I think Dan Lanning is an excellent coach. I think he's done a great job picking up where Mario, sort of left things for him. He's continued to recruit at a really high level, develop players. Dakarian Moore is an elite young wide receiver, another top right up there with Malachi Tony, even though they lost their best receiver to injury. And they've lost a bunch of guys on defense. He's identified the right guys in the transfer portal, just like Mario has. And of course, Ohio State's the defending champions. When you look at some of those numbers for some of those teams and how Miami compares, is there anything that stands out to you and says, Miami is better than I thought they were, or they're not as good as I thought they were?
Well, listen, one of the areas that I think is going to be key for Miami moving forward, and I think that has been the key so far, is if you see turnover margin, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're 10th in the country in turnover margin right now, and that's higher than pretty much everybody on that list right now, except for they're tied with Indiana. I think that keeps Indiana in games as well, and also points off turnovers are 14th in the country compared to everybody else. Indiana's the only one ranked higher in this situation. So turnovers are huge, and putting points on the board off turnovers is big as well. And I think that sort of makes up for the penalty yardage. It sort of mitigates that a little bit because you're able to force the other team into mistakes. You're able to cut possessions down. You're able to get short fields and put points on the board. I think where they need to improve, we're still looking at 6.35 yards per play on offense. That's 40th in the country. It needs to be a lot higher. They need to be at least in the top 25. If you look at Ohio State, they're ranked 10th, Oregon 7th, Indiana tied for 7th, and Texas A&M 25th. And yards per play on defense are solid. I think they're good there. I think they need to improve as well. And part of that is these lulls that the offense goes into where the defense has to defend more snaps. Eventually, they wear down a little bit.
Yeah, a couple of things stood out to me. Number one, the pressure allowed percentage. Miami's number one in the country. Obviously, have done a phenomenal job protecting Carson Beck and giving him a tremendous amount of time. You look at the offensive line sack rate; it's 36. He has been sacked a couple times. And you look at it and compare it to Ohio State. Ohio State's second best offensive line to this point in the country. Granted, the toughest team that they faced is probably Washington, who is 4-1. Of course, they played Texas as well in that opener. But you look at their sack rate percentage, nobody is getting to Julian Sayin right now. And then meanwhile, Oregon, they're just as good. I mean, fourth in the country with a bunch of new offensive linemen. They're number one in sack rate. But I think Dante Moore's only been sacked once or twice the whole season to this point. And so another stat that I look at, yards after catch, which I love. I've got access to this new statistical thing called True Media, and man, let me tell you, I'm able to look up just about anything at this point. And yak, yard after catch, Miami's receivers averaging 6.8 yards after catch, which is 25th in the country. Even better than Ohio State, right? With Jeremiah Smith and some of their star receivers, Carnell Tate, another one. So they are able to make plays after the catch. Texas A&M is better right now among the five teams you're watching, and that's because Mario Craver is one of the best receivers in the country. He's an absolute beast, a kid that they got from Mississippi State. So, but I think in a lot of areas, I mean, Miami is right there with the best teams. And you mentioned turnover margin, points off turnovers. That's going to be huge. To this point, Miami's done an excellent job protecting the football, and that's that was a key in this game. I thought against Florida State, I thought Florida State would try to do some things to throw Carson Beck off. In the end, they basically said, "You beat us," and he did.
Yep, absolutely. And he found the matchups that he wanted. Give credit to C.J. Daniels breaking open whenever he had one-on-one coverage, splitting the coverage there in that deep pass he caught from Carson Beck, and of course Malachi Tony yards after the catch. He was tremendously explosive in this game, and it's great to see that he's coming into his own this season as a freshman and being such an impact on this offense.
And Miami has two guys that are top 50 in yards per game in terms of rushers and receivers, right? Malachi Tony's 43rd there. Mark Fletcher's 32nd. The only team that doesn't have anybody in the top 100 there is Oregon among these five teams. So everybody has somebody statistically who's doing something for them among the best in the country. And so, look, it's a long way to go, long season to go. But I think it's fun to do sort of these comparisons, right? How does Miami look as a team compared to some of the other best ones? And we'll do that again as time continues. But I wanted to shift the discussion a little bit, Carlos, now to our conversation on the opponents, the best remaining opponents for Miami, who the toughest tests are. I have some more numbers to throw at you, but off the bat, who do you think the toughest opponent left on Miami's schedule is, without looking at the numbers?
I think it's everybody. I think we're coming into conference play now. We're coming into a situation where they not only know that they've had these hiccups in the past in conference play, especially going back to last season when the season was derailed in the ACC play, but also because of the way it's structured this season, they aren't playing Georgia Tech. They aren't playing Virginia, which are two teams that are also undefeated in conference and could potentially
Duke.
end up, yeah, Duke. So you've got these teams that you don't play and you don't really control your destiny outside of needing to finish undefeated. If you lose one game in conference, you could be out of the conference title game. And then you're hoping that the committee votes you in, which they should if they end up losing one game into the playoff, but you never know, right? Based on that situation. So to me, every game is critical. Every game is tough because of the stakes and because of the fact that it's a conference opponent now. Now it's not somebody that you're unfamiliar with, right? Now they've got enough tape on you. They've seen you year to year. They know what you're coming with. You've already played 5 games. They've seen what you've done within these 5 games, and they've already got a scheme for you ready to go. Um, but in terms of talent wise, I think I said it a few weeks ago. I thought Louisville was the game that scared me the most on the schedule because you're coming off Florida and Florida State back to back. I know there's bye weeks in between, but those emotional highs of beating your rivals and then coming into a game like Louisville, maybe there's a little bit of complacency. Maybe we see a little bit of that mental breakdown that we saw in the fourth quarter against Florida State. We've seen lulls with in the second halves of the game and third quarters before that. That creeps in a little bit, and it's a little closer than it should be.
Well, let's take a look at the next three opponents, and I have another graphic here to compare Miami to their next three opponents. We'll flash it on here in a second. Look, first of all, Louisville. The one thing I will say that stands out about Louisville is they're able to get to the opposing quarterback. They rank third. Miami's second in the country in team pressure rate. But number three is Louisville. And look, they don't have a bunch of sack masters and a bunch of guys that are, uh, you know, I guess terrorizing opponents, even though they rank 22nd in sacks per game. But it's a defense that keeps them in the game and can create headaches. And so I think for Miami going into this game, you want to establish the run. You look at their Louisville's rushing defense. They're 31st in the country in yards allowed per carry. Miami's going to obviously want to go into that game uh, pushing the ball down the field through the running game between the tackles, pushing Louisville around, sort of establishing themselves the way that they want to do first. And if they can't, then it's going to fall on Carson Beck to make the throws that he made against Florida State.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that really hurts Louisville is their defense isn't great, right? They're giving up 21 points a game, not great coming into this game against Miami. I think Miami's offense can score on Louisville. The thing is, like you talked about, I think Louisville can also scheme up that defense. It might be one of these teams that can counterpunch Miami, like we talked about last week. The Hurricanes can shut the door, but then they go in this lull. And do teams take advantage of that brief moment where the Hurricanes lose focus and where they're sort of getting conservative on offense? I think Louisville could score with them back and forth like we saw a year ago. Not the same Louisville offense, but I think Brom's a hell of a coach and he could scheme some things up.
Well, and Chris Bell, I don't have the graphic here because I did this one on Monday morning, and I don't have all the complete numbers here for some of these ACC teams that I have in the other sheet. But um, Chris Bell had a ridiculous touchdown catch for Louisville in that Virginia game, one-handed back shoulder type deal. He's number 6 in the country in receiving yards per game. So this is probably going to be the best receiver that Miami has faced to this point, even with Notre Dame. Obviously, they didn't have to face Dallas Wilson. He wasn't healthy to play in the Florida game. So, and Deuce Robinson was good. I thought they did a decent job against Deuce Robinson, but Bell statistically is the best one that they will have faced so far this season, and that'll present a challenge for Miami's DBs, which is good. You want them to get challenged by some of the better cornerbacks, especially if this is a playoff team.
Yeah, absolutely. And then moving forward, I think SMU also is going to present a unique challenge because of the way Rhett Lashley calls offenses. I think they've started to roll a little bit. They're looking a little bit better as the season's worn on. Defensively, they're nowhere as near as good as they were a year ago, but I think their offense can be better. They're averaging 34 points a game. They're starting to get rolling a little bit, and I love the way Lashley calls games. We talked about it when he was here as the Hurricanes offensive coordinator. So you never know what he's going to have in the bag.
Yeah, and look, Kevin Jennings has the experience of leading his team to some wins, and you know, to me, before the season, you know, people ask me which game do I think Miami could lose. I said SMU, and a lot of people laughed at me and they said, "Oh, there's no way SMU lost too much." And yes, their defense is not very good right now. They're last in pass defense right now at the moment, but. You know, by the time Miami gets to that game November 1st and they're leaving the state for the first time all season, it'll be interesting to see where Miami is health wise. Would be interesting to see where SMU is. Do they get some defensive players to start playing better? They start performing better. This weekend they play Stanford at home, the two worst pass defenses in college football in terms of yards per game. So it'll be an interesting game to see what Kevin Jennings does in that
It'll
contest.
be it'll be a defensive pillow fight.
Yes, yes, it will. I'm going to take a look at the last four opponents here for Miami and put them up on the screen, Carlos. You can see Syracuse had a huge win at Clemson a couple weeks ago, but they've lost two in a row since then. They got absolutely walloped by Duke a couple weeks ago. Manny Diaz absolutely crushed. And they look like a different team with Ricky Collins as their quarterback than they did with Steve Angeli. You look at NC State. Syracuse and NC State will both be home games for Miami. Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh, the last two games of the regular season, will be road games. CJ Bailey, obviously the Hollywood Chaminade product who threw all those touchdown passes to JoJo Trader and Jeremiah Smith for many years. He has gotten NC State off to a 4-2 start. Offensively, they're pretty good. They can score points, but defensively is where they have their issues. I think Miami should be able to win both of those games pretty easily. Even the next one at Virginia Tech, they obviously had the coaching change. Kyron Jones is not even in the top 100 and you know QBR right now. The interesting game to me, Carlos, is Pittsburgh. Mason High Central is a true freshman quarterback. Look, they beat the crap out of Boston College. Boston College is 1-4, but that offense looks a little different, and they can put up points. And if you look at some of those numbers on Pittsburgh's defense, they're also good at getting at the quarterback. Fourth in the country in pressure rate. It's the last game of the regular season. We know what Miami did in 2017. They went on the road, heavily favored to beat Pittsburgh, and somehow lost that game. So, to me, I look
Against a
at it
freshman
as
quarterback.
yeah, I guess a true freshman quarterback who ended up getting drafted, right? So, to me, I think Pittsburgh, you bookend it. Pittsburgh and Louisville are the two toughest opponents left on Miami's schedule.
Yeah, I agree. I think Syracuse, not only are they just nowhere near as good on offense this year, their defense has been atrocious. And NC State has also not been as good on defense as they've been in the past historically. So I don't see them being a threat to Miami. I mean, of course, it's ACC play, like I just said, anything can happen, and all these games worry me. But to me, the most worrisome out of these four is Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and again, their coach, he's won an ACC championship before. He knows how to get his players up. It'll probably be cold up there in Pittsburgh, so I'm expecting that one.
He's the kind of guy you call piss and vinegar, baby.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting, Carlos. Let's turn the discussion here to the mailbag. I gotta see if we got any responses when I sent out the alarm here for some questions. Let's see. We got 5 so far.
Hey, not bad. We
Um,
sent a late bat signal, and you guys came through with 5, and I'm sure more are going to be rolling in as we talk.
yes. All right. Let's get here to the first one. This one's from Myrick McCray, MJ McCray on Twitter. What position group from last year's team would you add to this year's team? Let's start with that one.
Uh, you mean honestly, right now, I wouldn't change anything. I like the
No.
way this team looks better in last season's. I thought the receiver group was going to be a little weaker this season, but the way Malachi Tony has emerged and CJ Daniels, the way he's playing, I'll take this receiver core over last year's receiver core right now, even without Restrepo, because I think Malachi Tony gives you that consistency that Restrepo gave you with more explosiveness.
I guess for me, I mean, I wouldn't replace anybody, but I would love to have a little bit more depth on the defensive line, on the defensive tackle position, on the edge with some of the guys that Miami lost, only as insurance for Ruben Payne
Right.
and Mesidor, who have been nicked up in the past. And, you know, we saw Moten, I think, get nicked up in the previous game. Guys that have, you know, look, it's a long season. So to me, I would love to add if we could bring back some guys to add depth. I would love to do that, but we don't live in that world anymore. Another question here from Myrick: what position group from this year's team would you add to last year's? Well, I think
The entire
uh,
defense,
the
the
entire
secondary, maybe.
defense. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one more: which of the teams would see the bigger improvement, 2024 or 2025? I think the 2024 team with a defense might have gone pretty far in the playoffs. You had a
Yeah,
special quarterback, you had a special group of receivers. So I think without question the 2024
you
team.
had some really good
And I
running back,
yeah, and I'll add this. Look, I
better
didn't
tight
think
end.
Miami. No, I had questions coming into this season. I thought it would be tough to replace the receivers. I thought I had questions about the secondary, even though they spent a lot of money on it. In the end, they made all the right moves. Credit to Mario and Dennis and all the guys that have done a phenomenal job behind the scenes and getting this team right. All right.
Absolutely.
This is from Dominicus 305. Domi, can this team overcome Mario's play calling not to lose strategy? Though I want to see improvement in pre-snap penalties, this team is talented enough to overcome those. My biggest concern is can it overcome Mario playing it safe? What do you think?
Um, I don't think they can overcome it if it continues. I think if they run into a team in the playoffs that's on their level. First of all, I don't know that they'll be able to do that late in the game to hold it. They may have to come from behind. That's something they haven't had to do just yet, except for that the one drive against Notre Dame, which was tied. They weren't even behind. They were down 3-0 against Florida State, and that was pretty much where that trailing ended. So to me, they may moving forward, especially into the playoffs, have to start playing from behind instead of trying to protect the lead. But if they do play somebody in the playoffs, you can't be conservative that way and just try to hold the ball and expect the other team just to full 10 as well. I think it could cost them at some point in the season. I think they need to break out of that and try and continue to be aggressive in smart ways.
Yeah, I think against playoff teams, it'll come back to beat them, and it could come back to beat them in a place like Pittsburgh or SMU. It could come back to beat them if they fall asleep at the wheel against Louisville. Those teams, I wouldn't say those teams are on Miami's level. Certainly not on Miami's level. Miami should win all of those games. They should be favored in every single regular season game left. But once you go up against quality, high level teams that are just as talented as you are, the Ohio States, maybe the Oregons, maybe the Georgias, or
No, even Ole Miss, Alabama, other teams like
right,
that. I mean,
any of these SEC teams, you cannot f around and find out.
yeah.
You can't play fafo. Gotta like take care of business, and not let your guard down, because if you do, you're not gonna win those games. All right, this is from All MIA Sports. Vic says Malachi Tony is the best wide receiver talent in Miami since.
Wow. I don't know about wide receiver talent just yet, like overall receiver talent. I think he's the most explosive guy that I've seen. Uh, maybe hmm, since a Philip Dorsett, maybe. He reminds me a little bit of Philip Dorsett in that explosiveness.
Well, Philip
Um,
was the he's not as fast as Philip, but Philip was the last first round pick receiver that they have. I think Malachi is, to me, he's Santana Moss. And I know Santana Moss was faster, but Santana Moss's work ethic, hunger,
yeah,
all the things that made him really, really good. You saw how special he is in the open field. He reminds me of Santana. And people were like, oh, no, he's not Santana. There's no way. Well, Santana was not a big receiver, and neither is Malachi.
he's got some. He's got some Roscoe Parrish in him too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing I love most about Malachi is his attitude. Like, this is a guy who didn't buy the hype into himself, right? When he was growing up as a kid and people calling him baby Jesus and all this other crap. Like, he is the real deal in terms of work ethic. And I think that matters when you think about this team going forward, right? And can Mario sustain winning? Right now, you've got two humongous leaders on the offensive and defensive line. You got Francis Mauigoa, you got um, Ruben Bain, right? Two guys that are homegrown or, in-state products, so to speak, that have come in here and they carry the personality of the team. Next year, when those guys are gone and in the NFL, who's going to take over? Whose team is this going to be? It's probably going to be Malachi Tony's team. Even though he'll be a second-year sophomore wide receiver, he's the guy who could set the tone for this team going forward. And you need that. You need that as a program. You need Bryce Fitzgerald to emerge at safety. You need guys who can carry the mantle if you're really going to be back. Because Miami being back is getting to national championship games and sustaining winning. And
Yeah,
that's something that I talked about with the administration when they went to go look to hire Mario. Because to them, no, we don't want to just have one good season. We want to be Miami again. We want to be the great Miami team. And in order to do that, you need to layer upon layer upon layer talent and leadership. And I think that's what Mario's sought out to do. This isn't a one hit wonder.
Yeah, and it's more than just talent, like you said. It's cultural, right? It's you have to have the right culture within the building and within the team for so that continue to foster and bleed down class to class to class to where you're building guys that self-police like the old school teams did, right? You had guys that were such leaders that they handled things, that they coached the team, and the coaches were just there to create the structure, that create the discipline, give them the opportunity to be leaders and put them out the field and let them run like wild dogs, and they take care of each other.
All right, this is from Scary Rambus, who of course sent us that
A
email
guy.
and yeah, sent us those stats about Mario. He says Mario did it again. He went into a shell and almost cost us another game. The staff seems to blame everything, but his tendency to turtle with a lead. Is there any hope he changes before it costs us?
Well, the
I
first thing we
think
need to do is get Mario to stop playing Mario Kart. He likes getting the turtle shells and throwing them at people, right? He likes to go in the turtle mode. We need to stop Mario from playing Mario Kart. We need to keep him away from Epic Universe in Orlando because he's got a great Mario Kart ride. Mario, stay off the Nintendo games.
yeah, I don't know that he'll change. Like I said, I think he's got a little bit of PTSD. I think he just does not want to blow a lead, and he's going to go into conservative mode. And look, could Miami have won that game by more points if they didn't make all those penalties? Mario right about that? Yes, he's absolutely right. They shouldn't even have been in that situation without those penalties. But at the same time, it's clear they made a conscious effort to run between the tackles and to just try to run the clock out. And that's something that against good teams will cost them. Somebody who's really good on offense will make them pay for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the rushing numbers through PFF, they ran the ball between the tackles. Let's see here, 4, 6, 10, about 15 times, right, out of their 31 attempts. They were averaging about 3 yards, 4 yards a carry in there. And when they got outside the tackles, they were averaging over 5, 6 yards a carry. So come on, man.
All right. Last question here, I believe, from Eric, if I'm looking at this correctly. He says, any word on when JoJo Trader will start getting snaps? This is from John94113. Eric, your guess is good as mine. I'm not around this team like I was back when I was a beat writer. Your best bet is one of the beat writers finding out what the real story with JoJo is. I think right now it's trend. Like Mario has a story that he was supposed to be back in the rotation, and he would be if he was playing better. I don't know what phone call my express and other places to find out what the real story with JoJo is at this point. But I think it's could be trending towards a red shirt, could be trending towards a transfer. Who knows? I mean, at this point, the fact that he's not on the field and playing when he was expected to be, and the coaches were talking about God and good receiver, yada yada. Uh, you know, it's odd to me that he hasn't touched the field yet. So I don't have an answer for you, but I'll try to get to my source, figure it out.
All right. Nothing left on the X messaging.
Nothing that I think good. You do me as always, and final here, we head into the games you're gonna this weekend, or you away from the TV.
No, I will watch as much football as I can. Thanks to YouTube TV, I get that 4 screen split that I could do on my television, and I go from 4 screen split to 4 screen split. So I watch as many games as possible while I'm gorging on food and drinking light beers.
Thanks for coming out. I will be watching the Oregon Indiana game. Will be you have Alabama, Missouri. You have a bunch of good games. Pitt is going towards that'll be wow. Uh, Tuning in toward back next week.
Please.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're now you broke up all the way down towards the end.
I
Now you're
hit
back.
end recording. I'm hoping